I'm Agnes Balassa, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of Governor Kitzhaber to this training today on sector strategies. We have been extremely fortunate here to have the opportunity to bring together both national and Pacific Northwest experts on the issue of sectors. As all of you in our viewing audience are aware, sector strategies is one of the primary three strategies that were adopted by the Oregon Workforce Investment Board and by the governor as a leading strategy to support our workforce development efforts here in Oregon. And so part of the mission for today is recognizing that different folks in our room have different levels of understanding and information about sectors. What we're going to do is build kind of a common ground and also to talk about what this means for our various communities, urban, rural, what it means for the various customers that come to our WorkSource centers and other service locations, including low-income populations, those with barriers to employment, and then also to focus on what the benefit is for industry, because ultimately what's most important about sector strategies is they provide a quality way for us to connect the needs of the industries with the skills and the programs and the services that we provide to individuals. And so we're hoping today it gives you an opportunity to go a little deeper on all of that than you may have had an opportunity to do in the past. This is only our first effort around bringing all of you together for this conversation. We will have some future trainings as well, but we thought we would start with this one. And as we're getting started, I think the main thing I want to say right now is thanks very much to the Center on State Innovation and Sam Unger for bringing together this fabulous panel. The center has been fabulous to work with. They help states try to lead initiatives, and they have the ability to tap into all kinds of national networks to get us the kinds of speakers and presentations that I think you will all enjoy very much today. And so with that, I'd like to turn this over to Sam to talk a little bit about our panels and the agenda for today. Thank you.
So thanks so much, Agnes, and thanks to everyone for coming, to our distinguished panelists, everyone out there in Radio Land. We are very, very pleased to be able to help with this. As Agnes mentioned, the Center for State Innovation is an independent nonprofit research project. We are university-based, and we're designed to do more or less exactly what we're doing here today, which is to try to bring the leading academic, think tank, and practitioner models and research best practices and provide them to executive staff and to state policymakers such as yourselves in the hope that it will help to inform the very good and able work that you guys are doing here in Oregon and will be doing going forward. I think, well, Agnes has done a great job of setting up the day and the panel, so I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping, I guess, and then turn it over to our first panel. I'm not going to say a lot about sector strategies because, as Agnes has sort of already introduced the issue, and you're about to hear a great deal more about it from, I would say, three of the most experienced, three of the leading, maybe the three leading national experts in sector strategies, if I may be so modest. Housekeeping-wise, I think there'll be two panels today with a break in the middle, as Agnes said. I think she mentioned that the format that we're using is that we're going to have all of the speakers make their remarks and then have time for questions afterwards. So if you can, pardon me, if you can hold your questions until after all of the speakers have presented. Obviously, if there's something that's unclear or some burning question on point, feel free to raise your hand and speak up. But in general, for discussion points and questions, we'd like to wait until the end. So yeah, without too much further ado, the first panel, I think, is, as you can hopefully see from your agendas, is going to be something of an overview and introduction and a little bit of discussion about best practices and useful models on sector strategies from, as I said, three of the very most experienced and able researchers in this field. There'll be a short break, and then in the second panel, we'll be looking a little bit at a few case studies drawn basically loosely from the Pacific Northwest region, from the Portland area, from the Seattle area, and from rural areas loosely in Oregon, Washington, the Northwest, and from the clean energy sector, also sort of spanning that area. But I'll let those presenters tell you about that as well. So without further ado, I'm not certain who's kicking off the panel here, so Martin will be. But so let me just quickly introduce all three of these folks, and they can say more about their background if they want. But Martin Simon is a researcher. He's the head of the Workforce Development Project at the Center for Best Practices at the National Governors Association. He has been in and around this issue of sector strategies, working with states in a variety of capacities for quite a long time, was one of the really early voices on this. Next to him to his left is Larry Good at the Corporation for Skilled Workforce, based in Michigan. Also this is an issue among others that he has been working on and doing research on for quite a long time. And to his left, Jack Mills, the National Network of Sector Partners at the Insight Center in California, who I have not had the pleasure of working directly with in the past, but unquestionably also one of the leading voices on sectors, and has done a variety of really good and useful research, some of which I think you'll be talking about here today. So without further ado, thanks so much again to everyone for being here. Thanks so much to Agnes and Ben for giving us the opportunity to do this and to try to help a little bit with this effort. I'll turn it over to Martin.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning to everyone here in the studio and those of you out in virtual land. I want to thank Sam and Agnes for inviting us to be a part of this training session today. I found it interesting when Larry and Jack and I were corresponding about how we were going to do this presentation. There was a strong feeling of deja vu, because we've done panels like this as part of a joint project that we did for 5 years, working with states on what we called accelerating state adoption of sector strategies. So this is kind of like an encore presentation that we're doing here today, but very pleased to be here and to see that Oregon's going to pick up on sector strategies again. Oregon was part of that project that I talked to and was part of our policy academy on that. I don't see anyone in the audience besides Greg White who might have been a part of that team, which was in the mid-2000s. But I think at that time you had a strong base to build on, and I think that'll serve you well as you pick up on sector strategies. We've been asked to do is provide an overview of sector strategies, and we're going to do that by focusing on 4 questions. And we're going to share the time up here, hopefully spending about half of the time that's been allocated for this session on presentation, and then to give you plenty of opportunity to raise questions. But we'll start by talking about what are sector strategies. There's some terminology differences you'll hear, and hopefully by the end of this you'll be clear on what some of those terminology differences are, or you'll say, as I often do, it doesn't really make any difference because we're talking about some of the same things. We'll talk about why it's important, what's in it for your customers, and then what are some of the lessons that we've learned from our work with states and local initiatives, and what are some of the trends going forward that it might be important to pay attention to. So let me start with, I was told this is going to be a technology challenge for me, but well, let me start with what sector strategies are and kind of put it in some historical context. Sector strategies have been around for several decades, and they really started with working with low-income workers and trying to provide better employment opportunities for these workers, so it focused on building the skill sets of those workers, but also on improving the quality of jobs. One of the early examples was the garment industry in New York City, where labor and the industry employers got together and really worked on improving the quality of jobs, improving opportunities for increasing wages for the workers in that industry. Another early example actually started in San Francisco with some of the top hotels there. They were finding that they were having problems retaining workers. They were having problems with quality of service. And they came to this realization that they probably should have early on, that they shared a common workforce in the area, and that when they were actually competing for each other for these workers. And so they, again, got together with labor organizations and focused on putting together a common training curriculum for improving the skill sets of the workers, and also changing the working conditions at these hotels. And they found that the quality of service improved, their retention of workers increased, some of the same results we see in some of the research that's been done on sector strategies. But sector strategies have really created pathways to good jobs for low-income workers. They've improved the quality of jobs. They've assisted employers in creating jobs by having a better skilled workforce. We've heard a lot about skill gaps in a variety of industries, manufacturing and healthcare too, particularly, and sector strategies have helped employers in these industries begin to fill some of those skill gaps. So those are a variety of things that over the time that sector strategies have been implemented, that they've been able to achieve. They really began to gain momentum in the late 1990s and early 2000s. We saw states like Washington who started their skill panels at that time and invested, since then have invested in hundreds of local industry partnerships, what they call skill panels. And then in 2005, Pennsylvania started their sector initiatives. And it's important to point out Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania was one of the few states that was able to get their industry leaders that were behind the sector strategies at the regional level to go to the legislature and convince them that they should invest in these sector strategies. And they were able to get an appropriation of $20 million. I don't think there's any other state that's since then has been able to get that large of a commitment. Now, all of these states have gone through the recession, and in Pennsylvania, we've seen that $20 million shrink down to $1.6 million today, but still there is that investment that is occurring. So now when we look across today where sector strategies have taken root, we're beginning to see that they're increasingly being used to integrate supply-side strategies like career pathways with high-impact industry cluster strategies that are on the economic development side of things. Where sector strategies come in, they're kind of at the intersection of both of these and bring together both those supply-side and demand-side strategies. So that's the historical context that I think is important as you begin to look at. Well, oh, there we go. Well, I can get them to jump ahead twice, but I can't seem to get it to focus on one. If the technician can bring that back one slide, thank you. You're better at this than I am. So what are state sector strategies? This slide shows a pretty succinct definition of that, but what they are is integrated policies that promote the development of local sector initiatives across industries that are really the drivers in the local economies. And states are using a variety of tools to support and implement sector strategies in regions across the states. One is they're making choices about how they're using their funding, whether that's braiding the funding across funding sources, leveraging different funding sources to support sector strategies, or as Pennsylvania did, getting an appropriation from the legislature to support these. They're also aligning their workforce development, education, and economic development policies so that they can be supportive of these sector initiatives at a regional level. And you'll hear that theme over and over again through our remarks today. Also, a really important tool is doing the industry analysis, identifying what are the industries that are the true drivers of local economies, and then drilling down into what are the needs of those industries and sharing that analysis with the local areas that are interested in developing these industry or sector partnerships. And another key tool is building the capacity of the providers and the stakeholders in the local communities. And states that are implementing sector strategies have used a variety of methods for doing that. A popular one is having academies where they bring together teams from local areas, where there's a peer exchange and also opportunity to build a plan for implementing local sector strategies. Today, there's over 25 states that are implementing sector strategies. This map just reflects those 25 states. This is actually the 25 states that were involved in the initiative that we jointly implemented. We know that there are other states like Arizona. It has developed a statewide strategy for implementing sector strategies. They don't have any special resources that they're dedicating to this. They're using policy levers, they're using planning guidance across programs to be able to drive this new strategy in their state. Other states are Virginia that are doing significant work in this area. West Virginia and Hawaii are also at earlier stages. So there's momentum building, continuing to build even during these recessionary times. There are some key elements that are a part of a state sector strategy framework, and I'm going to get this technology down before I finish my part of this. A key one is data-driven decision making. Doing the analysis of your industries and having a deep understanding of the industry across your state and the regions is a critical element. And without that, it's really difficult to move forward. This is stressed over and over again by the states that have developed these strategies. In tandem with that, you need to understand the makeup of your workforce, both across the state and the region, and then to be able to identify what are the gaps between the needs of your industry and your workforce. And then the third tier of analysis is what is the capacity of your training and education systems to be able to fill that gap. And then working in partnership across these sectors to be able to address those gaps. Another key element is that it's a dual customer focus, both employers and workers, and the needs of both. There has to be a balance there. Regionally focused, recognizing that labor markets are not driven by geopolitical boundaries. It really doesn't matter whether it's a city boundary or a county boundary, a community college boundary, or your workforce investment areas. It's really what are the labor markets in which your industries are working. So that regional focus is another key element. And then focusing on multiple firms in one or related industries. Traditionally, workforce and particular economic development programs have focused on single firms. Well, in sector strategies, it's multiple firms in an industry. And it's looking at what are the workforce needs of these key industries, and then how to create career pathways for workers into those industries. Another element is that they're demand-driven and industry-led. We start really with the skills needs of an industry and then how to prepare workers with the right skills to meet those needs. There are several other elements that are pretty closely related. One is the public-private partnerships, which are really at the core of any sector strategy or initiative. State support these sector partnerships through resources and policy frameworks, which I referred to earlier. And these partnerships then lead to collaborative activities where you align resources and strategies across programs and organizations. No sector strategy or initiative can succeed if it's only being supported by one funding source or one policy or one system. It needs the integration and collaboration across those. And so that gets to the last element, and that's the alignment of workforce development strategies with economic development goals and investments, and then education policies and investments. I've talked about sector strategies at state level supporting. I hope my colleagues have a better handle on supporting. If the technician could bring that back a slide, that would be forward. I talked about state sector strategies supporting sector initiatives. So what are sector initiatives? They're very simply said, they're an industry-specific regional partnership. And maybe I can get to that slide. I know you have this as a handout. Well, what sector initiatives at a regional level do is address the needs of employers by focusing very intently on the workforce needs of a specific industry sector or a group of sectors over a sustained period of time. It's not just a one-shot deal. It's working with that industry over a period of time, concentrating on some specific occupations or set of occupations within that industry. It's addressing the needs of workers by creating formal career paths to good jobs within those industries, and also reducing barriers to employment within those industries. The sector initiatives can also bolster the regional economic competitiveness by bringing in the economic developers with the workforce and education providers to jointly plan on how we're going to address the needs in that region. It also engages a broad array of key stakeholders, and also promotes systemic change, whether that's in how funds are used across programs, how to improve access to education and training, changing the time that courses are available, for example, changing or modularizing courses so that there's building blocks, and then also changing employer practices, how their hiring, promotion, retention practices are all examples of what sector initiatives are about. And I'd like to get to the final slide here. This whole concept of sector initiatives is really creating a big tent that brings together the key stakeholders and forming a network among those stakeholders. And so we use this slide to kind of depict that sense of having a big tent of stakeholders that come together around a common mission. What I'm going to do is turn this over to Jack and test his skills at technology. Jack and his colleagues at the National Network of Sector Partners have done a lot of work with sector initiatives at the regional local level, as well as working with states. And so he's going to pick this up and talk about that in more detail and then share some examples. Thank you. You were able to get that.
Well, we'll see about this technology. Good morning, everybody. I guess this slide goes from the image of the big tent to a little bit about who is in the tent and a little bit about some of the ways in which people interact. I want to talk about those. First of all, it's important to think about interacting across multiple geographic jurisdictions. So often there's a distinction between the way that service delivery areas and workforce investment areas, and you can go on, governmental jurisdictions work against the labor market areas in which employers hire and in which people actually get jobs and get to jobs. So across geographic jurisdictions. Secondly, across publicly funded entities. Martin had spoken about several ways in which collaboration is really possible through the sector strategy amongst economic development folks who are focused on cluster approaches and educational folks who are focused on career pathways. I'd add to that the human service folks. We're looking to remove barriers for folks to go to work and support them, keeping jobs and moving up. And then across levels of education. So, there's lots of this work going on in the educational world, but if you think about the idea of advancing folks from entry-level jobs up to jobs that support themselves and their families very well, you can think of two parallel tracks, one of which moves people up on the educational side from cradle to grave, and the other of which moves them up on the employment side. Now, let's see what we can do here. So once people are in the Big Tent, let's talk a little bit about the roles that they play. And in the tent can be all of those that are on the who side of this slide. I want to talk about the what side of this slide. A key characteristic, as Martin said, is the data-driven decision-making. If you want to bring people together who have different missions as far as their organizations go, different funding sources, different eligibility requirements, different performance metrics, one good way to do that is identifying needs and driving the strategy that brings everyone together based on that data-driven decision-making. Connecting resources and formulating solutions. Very often in the public sector, the idea is there's a funding stream, we do what the funding stream tells us to do, and we stop doing it when the funding ends. Not very effective if your goal is to be responsive to the needs of employers in an industry and the needs of the job seekers and workers who are going to have those jobs. So instead of that, the strategy is to begin with the needs and then connect the resources and develop the solutions that will meet those needs. Providing solutions comes directly after that, and that happens both in terms of really understanding and articulating employer needs and also worker needs. Maybe the punchline here is that, especially in rural areas, what we see is long-term strategies. It's true for the urban areas too, but in the rural areas, 10-year strategies, 15-year strategies are not unusual because taking this approach provides long-term support for the industry and also the community. And the big project of community economic development for the rural areas is supported by that. Certainly we see the sector initiatives having longevity in urban areas too, and one pattern there is moving from one sector to working in multiple sectors. One way of thinking about this is a hub and spoke model for getting the job done. And I want to say two things about this. If you want to serve both a group of employers in the industry sector and a group of job seekers and workers, one key is to have an organization, we call it a workforce intermediary, that will coordinate and manage activities. And the reason for that is because there are multiple needs, multiple solutions that need to be provided, both for employers, also for job seekers, also for workers. And one thing we've learned from the business community, that it's a very unusual organization that can be all things to all people. A much more effective strategy is to get good at doing one thing or a few things. So sector initiatives bring together multiple partners to do what they're very good at, be that recruitment services, be that providing support services to remove barriers to work, be it training services, other skill development, be it services to the employers themselves. If that's the image for the model, what's the architecture? What's the process? Well, of course, we focus on an industry, and we use that intermediary to manage the services delivered by multiple partners. But a key thing is to think about two phases. One of them is the design and development phase. And this is another difference that sector strategies provide. That is, that data-driven decision-making leads to the kind of planning, the kind of design work that any business goes through as part of their business planning process. Here, there's a lot of work done before you actually get started with services, because if you do that work, you'll do a good job in providing the services. And so that leads to operations that really have effect, have great results. And of course, there's continuous improvement. There's a cycle because things change for industry, they change for workers and job seekers, of continuous learning, continuous revision of design, and then improvement of operations. So what are the results of that work? What issues do sector initiatives tackle? And here it ranges, and the range is driven by what the industry's needs are and what the job seekers and workers' needs are. But some examples are entry-level skill development and advancement, addressing hiring challenges. I looked at the food processing industry across the Northwest, and hiring challenges are a major problem consistently over years. Incumbent worker skill development, again, as businesses get more and more technologically advanced, skill development issues arise again and again. Retention issues, major cost for businesses, major problem for workers. If you can't keep a job, you can't make ends meet, you can't keep your workforce, then you have incredible costs in terms of rehiring and retraining. Work reorganization. As things change in terms of company strategies, there's lots of issues that come up for workers. Example in California, as they moved in the clean energy regulations, there's a partnership formed between the State Workforce Investment Board and the agency responsible for those regulations. They looked at what the changes were that businesses would need to make, and therefore what the skills workers would need to make, skill changes workers would need to make would be. Joint funding between the two of them supported training to achieve those skill changes. And of course, institutional and regulatory obstacles. You know, part of this is making the public environment work better for both the industry and for its workforce. I want to talk about 3 examples just to put some skin on the bones, if you think about it that way. So Richmond Builds is in a small and very low-income city. Manufacturing Works is in a big city in Chicago, better off. Prosperity is in Humboldt County, it's a very rural area, and you know, per capita income actually below Richmond, which is known in California as a very low-income city. So I'll go through those each in turn. So Richmond Builds, you know, it's led and managed by a workforce investment board. There's great collaboration. You can see the partners on this slide. There's a deep understanding of employer needs. And one key to Richmond Build's success is they won't train more people than they have commitments from employers to hire. Let me flip that double negative into a positive. Their strategy is to really count on the goal of filling jobs that employers have open or will have open and are committed to hiring for. That's what drives the numbers of trainees. You know, their target is at-risk youth. You can see who's on the roof there. Those are the folks who are in the training program, and they've moved in from being definition of at-risk youth to jobs that pay an average of $18 or more an hour. So Richmond Builds has had tremendous success, 90% success. Let me go on to Manufacturing Works. So this is part of the public workforce system. You could think of it, those of you who are in that system, as a one-stop or a career center or something like that. However, it's industry sector focused. It's focused on manufacturing. And it's run by a nonprofit organization. It's run by Instituto del Progreso Latino. And so some things about Manufacturing Works that stand out. One is that some manufacturing jobs are in what we call advanced manufacturing, but many are really not. They're pretty lousy jobs. Manufacturing Works has tiers of service. And for employers that want to improve job quality, and they'll talk about what you get out of that, you know, a much better workforce, for instance, if if you have pay and benefits and other compensation that improve, well, Manufacturing Works will help those manufacturers improve the quality of their jobs. Let me give you two examples. For an employer that commits to raising wages and benefits, they'll bring the Manufacturing Extension Partnership in to help that employer move into that advanced manufacturing phase through lean manufacturing techniques. Or a lot of employers, they're not up to date on health insurance, and health insurance costs are driving them crazy. And so Manufacturing Works will work with them to set up group health insurance. What do lean manufacturing and group health insurance have to do with workforce issues? Well, as you reduce those costs, the employer has the margin, has the revenue to raise wages and improve benefits. And so that's what the employers in Chicago are doing with Manufacturing Works Help. We go on to Prosperity. So Prosperity is fully named the Regional Prosperity Network. They're an example of a rural entity that has this long-term comprehensive economic development strategy. They've been doing it since 1999. They've targeted 6 industry sectors across a very rural area. They have broad collaboration. All of the partners in the area work together on this. One of the effects, though, just thinking about one of the partners, is as the understanding of the industry sectors got deeper, the community college in the area, College of the Redwoods, used that information to analyze its entire curriculum. And as you can see, 12 new certification and Associates of Science programs resulted from that. There's another benefit. When you see this kind of collaboration, when you see the moving together, partnering, understanding the needs, and addressing those needs with solutions, it tends to attract federal money. And so they won a $2 million community-based job training grant to support their work. Lots of details. Maybe the examples provide some clothes to go over the bones or some skin to go over the bones, but I really want to draw it back to the big picture now. You know, this work is not an add-on. It's not a new program. It's not something people do in addition to what they're already doing. It's a new way of doing business. It's new culture and strategies, both at the state level and also at the local and regional level. And that's what makes this work, because it's not just another wheel that folks have to keep spinning along with everything else they're doing. It's a different way of getting to the objectives, the mission, achieving the performance measures, using the funding you have most effectively. So let me leave it there and turn it over to Larry, who will go on to the next stage.
I'm not going to touch the remotes, as it was raised wonderfully in that location. Building from both of my colleagues' presentations, want to take us a few minutes to sort of focus on the what's in it for everybody side of this question. Why are people doing these? What's the impact that's resulting when people are doing them? At a broad level, you can think about sector initiatives as really doing a couple of major things. In working from an industry standpoint, and examples Jack was just giving go at it, and as well as Martin talked about earlier, that you're really talking about how companies, many of whom may be small, may not have analytic capacity internally, and are suddenly facing global competition in many cases, sort out how to change, how to be more competitive, how to be more productive, how to really identify their skill gaps and close them. On the worker side, it's really understanding pathways, having the skills to get into them. It's for both figuring out how the right matches are occurring. And from a taxpayer or public side, what we have learned is these strategies work, that you get bang for the buck. And we'll talk about some of the research on that in just a couple of minutes. But this is an efficient way to work, and it's an effective way to work. When you're doing sector strategies, there's a couple of things to think about of sort of what they bring together. Martin had talked earlier about sort of the importance of labor market analysis and data-driven decisions. Sector strategies give you a way to think about what you're focusing on and why it's important to focus on it and particularly by doing it at a multiple level. We talked earlier about the idea that it's a way of working with multiple firms at one time. When I grew up in the job training business way too many years ago, there was a lot of specialization about how to work with an individual firm in a customized training program. This is a strategy to work at a multi-firm platform and to bring together multiple stakeholders from the education and workforce side into one conversation. You are fundamentally helping a lot of win-wins around that coming through. As at the core of the sector strategy is the idea that workers win and companies win, and that it gives a way for all of the agencies who work in this arena to be current, to meet those needs, and sort out where they go. It's a way that that's going to be organized effectively. It's a strategy for aligning resources. Workforce is beaten up in various publications and congressional debates at times over all of the various programs and how many different disparate pieces there are. Sector strategies are a way you can align things, where you can really come together and say in a community, what are key industries, how do you bring those industries together, and how do you align resources in a way to leverage what those industries need and what workers need to be successful in those industries. Martin had talked at the outset about all of the buzzwords, and we're not going to probably go deep into definitional terms here of what's a cluster strategy versus a sector strategy versus a career pathway strategy. At the simplest level, what I would say is that the point to take away is all of these ideas relate to each other. That clusters have typically started from what's a geographic center of gravity, what's a magnet that other things hub off of. By having aerospace in Seattle, what does that spread across other areas around the region? And what are the strategies you do to enhance and build those clusters? Regions all over the country are trying to grow anchor clusters. Career pathways is an issue that Oregon has been one of the leaders in the country on, of really thinking about the whole progression of how people can build on learning, connect learning to work, have logical ways to make transitions as they go on. What we're seeing is in states around the country is how people link these ideas. You can do a career pathway initiative. The state of Oklahoma right now is doing a major initiative around building career pathways as the strategy that they organize all their workforce efforts around. One element within that is their sector strategy. And part of the issue there is how do you organize the sector to define the needs bring industry and define those needs clearly so that the pathways are about real needs, for example. You can, in other states, it's flipped over, where by working with several industries and communities, you can then build out from that to what the pathways are. One of the things to think about is how are sector initiatives different from the way we've always done business. And part of it is sort of what's the focus? Is the focus what the funding source is after? I remember doing in days in state government, contract after contract with folk, where it's what's the number of people you're doing X and the measures over, how many of those people did you actually get somewhere? It's very focused on, sort of counts of things. It's very focused on what the funding source is requiring. And it doesn't necessarily aggregate and often takes a lot of effort by people to do that. When you organize at a sector level, you're having an ongoing conversation. Jack named it in terms of these can go on for years in some cases where the groups come together well, see lots of issues to work on over time, and much deeper understanding of each other. And so you're really working on identifying issues and solutions to those issues over time, and then thinking about how the funding sources pay for them. So it makes the funding sources and not the drivers that they too often have been. As I mentioned, it means that you give an opportunity to work at a group level. Every customized training program I've been near touches, at best, tens of companies. With sector strategies, you can get to hundreds of companies, maybe thousands, depending on the nature of the industry and the region that you're in. You can get to a much greater scale of impact, and you can, really help them work with each other to see, in a world where they're globally competing, how firms share human capital well within a labor market. So there are examples in a number of markets around the country. I can think of one in my home state of Michigan in particular, where a group of manufacturers came together in a sector partnership to basically sort out that they were their own internal labor market as people moved from entry level up among these firms, but that they were having massive retention issues among them, and they were losing their workers quickly. And so they went together, jointly invested, built support services together to help retain those workers and help give them advice and counseling on career paths within all of it, as well as educational opportunity connection. And that made all of those firms stronger in a marketplace where they're auto suppliers and other kinds of small manufacturers, that that work can go anywhere. And the fact that they're able to hang on to that work is partly because they came together and worked on it. Jack really mentioned this earlier, but I want to stress it, that this is a work that builds relationships. A lot of what goes on now, if we look at colleges, workforce programs, other kinds of employment-based programs, often we do things at a transaction level. How do we deal with a specific in the moment? A sector partnership, as particularly as they mature over time, mean that the organizations involved and the key people in them get to know each other, get to understand the other's language, get to understand how the other side thinks about it, and it frankly then accelerates the ability to trust each other and to work on the issues together. It allows the issue of geography. We have a zillion maps in the country of the territory of the community college systems, the workforce boards, the employment service districts, the human service districts, you name them. You have the political maps of cities, counties, states, and so on. With sector initiatives, you don't start there. You instead start from what's the logical labor market for that industry. So if you're working with a magnet that's drawing from 3 states, are you really cutting across 3 states? If you're working in a hyper-local kind of an industry where the hiring is really within neighborhoods, how do you focus there? And you set the geography to match what really works for that industry. And then finally, the other key difference is that you're really doing systems change. You're not just meeting the outcomes that the programs call for. What do we mean by that? I think there's system change in at least 3 dimensions to think about. For the companies involved, it's really, are they rethinking their policies? Are they rethinking how they organize work? Are they looking at the issues they're having trouble with in terms of recruitment, skills, and so on, and dealing with them over a longer trajectory? What we see, a lot of companies that are small and mid-sized who participate in these initiatives find that they're getting breathing space within them to really think reflectively about the next few years in their industry that they don't get when they're in the press of day-to-day production, when they're in the press of the crises they're dealing with in the moment. It allows them to really think about job quality, to think about how to compete successfully on a high road strategy. For education and training sides of things, there's a range of system change that sector strategies can provoke. Lots of them on the slide, but it's about efficiency and effectiveness. Again, sector strategies can help with working adults. It can help with ensuring stuff is labor market relevant, that credentials are meaningful, lots of different angles. From a public policy standpoint, it's a way to rationalize resources. It's a way to make sense of priorities and say, here's a clear decision of where there's a coherent partnership of a group of firms in a key industry in a region, and here's the value add we can get if we invest there. What's in it for me? A question we got, and Martin referenced the work we did with a number of states. That was, we did academies with folk. Part of what we would see was people from all kinds of different walks of life who work in this field trying to figure out how this fit with what they were charged to do when they left our rooms and went back to their day jobs. And we just want to give some examples of what's in it for me, and we're happy to talk about more of that during the Q&A period. If you're an educator, that it really gives you a way to, first of all, be on top of industry needs, much more current than some of the formal statistics. You can hear about trends faster than they will emerge from research. You can be much closer to the ground. You can frankly cut across your silos. Right now, colleges frequently deal with the same employers in multiple ways, from the workforce side, from the occupational technical curriculum side, from continuing ed sometimes, other different ways. It allows you to really play out pathways and understand how to work coherently there. From a workforce standpoint, it really is a resource focusing. Workforce boards, as an example, are challenged constantly with how to get the most out of very, very scarce resources and tightened WIA funding and all of the other limits that work in this world. It's a way to think about leverage. It's a way to focus efforts on key industries and really then meet the needs of workers out of it and really meet the goals and aspirations that most boards have set. For economic developers, it's a way to work on workforce issues coherently and in a focused way. And that moves beyond the let's make a deal with a specific company. We see economic development finally progressing away from sort of what's the deal of the moment to how do you work on a sustained basis to encourage the growth of clusters, the growth of, frankly, sectors within regions and communities. And can see that a sector partnership can be a major tool in what they do. From a human service provider standpoint, it really provides a way to be in the conversation and really look at how your clients can move up, how your clients can get jobs, how your clients can get be connected to the industry, how there can be employment-related support services. The example I gave from Grand Rapids, Michigan. What wound up happening out of it was the companies came together, and what they paid for was a human services caseworker to work full-time with the handful of companies that were involved in this partnership. State couldn't afford to pay for it on their own. They had much larger caseloads back at the main office, but it allowed them to have for their entry-level or recently hired workers retention support, a way to figure out were they having child care issues, were they having transportation issues, and really connect. So it's a way to really target where and how the people you're working with are connected into career paths and good jobs. It's a different way to work. Jack talked about it being a different way of doing business, and I want to underscore that it really is very different when you start bringing together a group of companies and sitting at a table and listening to them and trying to talk about what are their needs, working with the data around that, the trends. That's very different than if you're doing job development. It's very different than if you're doing traditional job matching. It's work that requires a lot of collaboration. It's patient work. As you look at startup and sector partnerships, you may be several months into it before you feel like you're into really getting full traction, because it takes a while sometimes to wander around and figure things out. It takes a while to do the research or to get the right companies in the room and get them to really be able to articulate what their need is. From an agency standpoint, it really requires people thinking about how do you work together to meet these needs and put a really constructive environment in to think about that. It requires you being flexible, as I said, on geography. And I'd argue it requires a leap of faith that working this way will give you better results with customers than doing business the way we've always done it. We've got data that supports that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So what's in it for the customers? We're talking what's in it for the agencies and the companies involved. From an industry standpoint, there's a couple of major benefits that we see. One is that they frankly get better results. They get better retention. They get better quality and productivity. They get access to a range of training support resources in an organized way rather than being bombarded with things in their email that they don't know how to respond to. It gives them greater capacity to be profitable, to produce high quality goods. And it really gives the connection of sort of skill pipelines at an industry level and making sense out of that. Many of these partnerships started out of pain. You had healthcare partnerships start in many cases because of things like nursing shortages or 200% turnovers of CNAs or other kinds of very specific needs that people realized were not economically rational and were causing operational problems. Well, in many of the instances where those started, major impacts were made on those, and people could see that they were resolving the issues that we're dealing with. One of the things I like about this from a company standpoint is the idea of shared cost and risk. That there was a time not that many years ago when people really didn't want to talk to the company in the same industrial park about what they were doing versus what what I was doing myself. Today, in a global world, people are a lot more comfortable talking with their industry peers and trying to figure out how are we all going to survive in a world where we're not clear whether the work's staying here or going someplace else anywhere in the world, in an easily interconnected world. And so the idea that the company can share the cost of training, can share the sorting out the research, share the sorting out of needs they have in common at an industry level and solutions to that, in some industries has been incredibly appealing. One of the things that's been probably most appealing about sector strategies from a company standpoint is it gives them one place to talk to everybody from the government and education side. That if there's one table and they know that they can talk to the community college, the workforce board, any of the human service agencies, the employment service, and so on, in one place, that's pretty attractive. From a worker standpoint, sector strategies help on a number of levels. Evidence is that people who are trained and help through sector strategies get better wages. These strategies, as Jack gave examples of, focus sometimes on improving working conditions and defining pathways. And they've been incredibly successful at working on helping people get the skills they need for growing jobs and helping low-income workers be more employable. Oh, I got this far and that stopped. Should work now. Okay, good. So I've been alluding to data. Let me just talk about what's known about sector strategies. There have been both evaluations of specific initiatives and then one major random assignment study that gave some quantifiable empirical evidence. On the employer side, there's anecdotes, and we've got some here from 3 different states. But what they say consistently is that employers who are involved in these, who are asked, name significant improvements in productivity, reduction of turnover, quality of the product, customer satisfaction. That these are there are empirical evidence that are very relevant to the specific partnerships, and you can see some of the data on the slide. From a worker standpoint, the pattern that we've seen in a number of places, and we give an example from Massachusetts here, and then the study that Public-Private Ventures did a couple of years ago. People earn more that go through these, and this helps with poverty reduction and putting people on a path to a good job. In the study that PPV did, where they looked in depth at cohorts across several sector initiatives around the country and compared that to a control group, that by the second year after the end of training, participants were earning 30% more than people in the control group. That's a significant difference, and that data held up as they looked at it over time. And the Mott Foundation and I think a couple of others supported that research as a way to be able to demonstrate what we'd heard anecdotally, that these strategies really work and matter. There are lots of things that come out of sector partnerships. They're about key human capital issues. So they may be training programs, apprenticeship programs. They may be about pathway building, and anywhere from entry level through advanced. They also focus, as Jack noted, on non-training solutions about work organization, about what we saw in the healthcare industry in some number of states was identifying regulatory obstacles that were in the way of internal healthcare pathways within their states that they had to go on. They certainly have solved retention issues and the other pieces we could see here. So to wrap it up, we want to talk briefly about what we've learned about sector strategies. One of the things out of the partnership the 3 of us, our organization, were involved in was we asked the states who were involved a lot of questions to get to what have they learned as they've worked in this. And I'll name a couple of them, ask Martin to name a couple more, and then ask Jack to talk about some of the trends that we're seeing going forward. First of all, that consistently we heard states saying that these were a great way to work collaboratively towards shared goals, and a really positive experience to do. That, as Martin had talked about at the very outset, that working from data and using evaluation well were crucial to implementation. That sector strategies really do meet the needs of the industry and are a key way to target resources. Martin, some more.
A couple other lessons was, one was to build on the state's strengths. Each state is different. You have different economies, different environments, and each region is different. And it's to recognize what are your strengths, both at the state level and in the region, and start from where you are. In some states that are taking on sector initiatives, they have a lot of initiatives already underway at the local level. Minnesota was one example of one of the states that we've worked with. They had sector initiatives going on all across the state, but there was no connectivity to them. So they at the state level put together this overall framework that then helped bring together these initiatives at the local level that were working with a variety of different industries, and began to really better support those initiatives with the state resources, and to use different integrated policies to have some coordination across these various efforts. Other states have very few efforts underway, and the initiative starts at the state level, and again, putting together this framework at the state level and then trying to seed local sector initiatives. In other states, it starts with the industry. The industry is very interested in and coming needs in terms of either skill shortages or retention problems, depending on what the key is. And they approach either the education system or the workforce system at the local level or at the state level, and really are the drivers. Sometimes it's the legislature. And so the point is you start where you are at and build on the strengths that you have. Communication, the states that we worked with said communication of the results. They said communicate early and often is the message they gave in order to continue to build on the momentum. If you're having success, make sure that success is widely communicated to the stakeholders. And part of that communication is to begin to look at what are the outcomes that you're achieving. The states that we brought together, a group of 12 of the states actually decided they wanted to work together on an evaluation strategy and actually developed an evaluation strategy. And that was an important part of their overall communication strategy, so they could actually show that there are positive results for the key stakeholders, for employers, for workers, and for the community. Another key lesson was that you can't build either your state sector strategy or your local initiatives around a very rigid structure. It has to be very adaptable, and that has to be built in from the very beginning. I said earlier, if you're dependent on only one funding source to support your sector strategy or your sector initiative, you're bound to fail with that. So part of the adaptability is how you leverage the resources across programs and agencies early on, and how do you look at the different policies across programs and agencies and how they can be intersected so that you have that adaptability. So when a recession hits, you're not, and one funding source like a state discretionary dollars under WIA goes away, that you have another source to go to. And then looking for where the leaders are so that there are champions, whether they're champions at the state level, it could be someone in the legislature that really sees this as a very important way to bring together various policy agendas in the state, or often it's at the regional level. There may be an organization or a business leader that has been the driver behind a regional initiative and can become a champion behind these initiatives. And I just wanted to use an example here. It's actually having a real good understanding of the various initiatives you have going on in your state. I referred to the Minnesota, but for example, here in Oregon, you have been recognized for your career pathways efforts, for your cluster initiatives, looking for now how does your focus on sector initiatives really intersect with and build on these initiatives that you already have, so you have a real deep understanding of these initiatives and how sector strategies can intersect with these initiatives. Jack, you want to talk about some trends?
No, we're in an economy since 2008 that really has major differences than what preceded it. Very slow job growth, relatively high unemployment rates. And because sector strategies take up the question of what's going on in the economy on an industry by industry basis, it's meant that we are seeing some trends that might be worth talking about a little bit. As you pursue this work, you probably will encounter each of these. So as you might imagine, the skill gaps companies are facing, particularly as they compete in a global economy, that trend has been maintained, just as we've seen over the course of the years in the State Sector Strategy Project, the effort to align training and skill development resources to meet industry needs. That still continues as a strong trend within this current economy. I think one new thing that we're seeing is that since the possibility of people moving up has been limited because there's less in the way of openings, baby boomers are hanging on to their jobs. The recent study of young workers, and they're not getting into jobs where there are as many career pathways available to them. So those conditions have changed due to the recessionary economy. And so we're seeing sector initiatives pursue the improvement of job quality in those industries as a second strategy for making it possible to get people into family supporting jobs. And those strategies, just like Manufacturing Works provides an example, are about meeting a win-win scenario, meeting the business needs as well as the worker and job seeker needs. You know, a third thing that we're seeing, and this is something that you have examples of here in Oregon, are efforts to work with companies to create additional jobs and supporting them to do so as part of a deal. And the deal is that those jobs are opened up to non-traditional workers as well as traditional workers in the industry. So opened up to, in particular, people with low incomes, limited skills, other barriers. These strategies make it possible to move people in because they help the industry to create jobs. I'd say there's a fourth thing that I've seen as I've looked at Oregon, and it's a very positive thing that you're doing here. Some of your efforts are also about what I could broadly describe as employment equity. Looking at who is in the labor market, which populations really are not achieving in terms of levels of unemployment, levels of who's discouraged in the labor market, or not achieving in terms of earnings, or even not achieving in terms of occupational segregation, and supporting efforts to overcome those barriers. So employment equity is another trend that we're seeing. There's some things going on here in Oregon, but also in other places as well. So those are some of the things that you may look for as you pursue your work as you go forward from here. On behalf of all of us, I want to say thank you.